The resources of evidence. 4 types of evidence include psychological appeal, rational appeal, the primary strengths, and the primary weaknesses. And so the psychological appeal includes visuals, analogies, and stories, but no statistics or experts. The rational appeal includes analogies, statistics, and experts, but no visuals or stories. And primary strengths of evidence include visuals, packaging ideas as a whole, analogies altering perception, statistics amplifying and scoping, experts enhancing credibility, and stories inviting empathy. And primary weaknesses include visuals being oversimplified, analogies being irrelevant, statistics being incomprehensible, experts being distorting, and stories being unrepresentative. And so an example they talk about in this chapter that uses different types of resources of evidence is pollution. And so the person that they used as an example was McKibben. And McKibben provided evidence of very detailed nitrogen examples and what it does to pollution. And he also provides statistical data to indicate the extent of the change in amount of nitrogen produced. But there are some weaknesses with this, and one thing that they say is that there are noticeably problems with nitrogen, but people can probably find substitutes that will enable us to reduce our use of nitrogen fertilizer without making major changes in our overall use of fossil fuels and contributing to pollution, with experimentation, of course. And so that was one flaw. And in this excerpt from McKibben's essay, he also uses many statistics to support his point, such as the drop in birth rates among women in many countries, the projection that world population will top out at 10 or 11 billion from its current level, which is now over 6.7 billion. And most of these statistics are comparisons that enable us to have a sense of their significance, and people use a great amount of statistics to support their points, and we usually tend to trust these numbers more than most other kinds of evidence. But one of the main weaknesses of statistics is no matter how specific the numbers are, all of the numbers remain pretty remote from us, and so we don't have a real sense of what it means for the world population to be over 6 billion at present. And so we have a hard time imagining just what it will mean when that number doubles. And then another form of evidence, or another form of resource for evidence, is analogies. And so analogies can actually come in 2 varieties, one being literal and one being figurative. So literal analogies would be comparisons, and figurative analogies would be like metaphors. And so for literal analogies, they're made for the purpose of evaluation and prediction, and enable us to go from what is known and tested in comparison to what is unknown, untested, and not yet working. While figurative analogies assert a similarity that is more metaphoric. And one weakness of figurative analogy is that it really doesn't give any proof, and it marks no demonstration, but they're not all the same in rhetorical force, because some are a lot stronger and more persuasive than others. Another thing is credentials. Credentials are very important. And in McKibben's essay, there are a lot of good examples of the strengths and weaknesses of this kind of evidence. And so authoritative evidence is most strong when we know the credentials of authorities, so if they have training or their experience, or if we know the explicit relationship between the expertise of authority and the subject, like whether they have like a degree, and it's whether we know details about the data used by the authority to make interpretation, and it's when we know whether authorities are self-interested, that is, whether the conclusions drawn will benefit them. And it's weakest when we don't know the credentials, we don't know the explicit relationship, and vice versa. And so moving on to the essays. In the reading pop culture essays by Kubi and Kubi and the other, it's a really long name, but by them, Gay, Cantor, and Alida, they all use different types of resources of evidence. The most prominent ones to me were in the first essay, they provided a lot of credible experts and a lot of researchers, so obviously people who know what they're doing and who researched about the topic. So they reference like Percy Tannenbaum of the University of California at Berkeley, Gary A. Steiner at the University of Chicago, Charles Winnick of the City University of New York, and a lot more. So that was pretty impressive. And then in Gay's essay, the most prominent piece of evidence would probably be her story. And she kind of narrates us through her story in third person. So she talks about herself in third person, saying she, when she really means like I. And so she walks us through her chaotic life as she gets very lost in her 20s. And in Cantor's essay, he definitely uses the rational appeal. He goes over a lot of like the historical and cultural context, and he provides a lot of specific facts and examples. Comparative to Aleda's essay, where he has more of a analogical and psychological approach as he goes over the development of television to Netflix.